Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to what is like to be a lively panel discussion, Responsible Leadership, Tackling Resistance to Net Zero Carbon and Beyond. I'm Mark Richardson, the panel chair. I'm a partner with Troop by Waters and Anders.
I'm Ika Techa of AMRO Partners. I'm co-founder and chairman, and I lead on the innovation and data strategy at AMRO. We're in the living sector, focusing on multifamily, co-living, and student housing.
I'm Mel Barrett. I'm Chief Executive of Nottingham City Council. We deliver a range of services to a busy, vibrant, diverse city, and we also convene and collaborate.
Matt Webster, pleased to meet you all. Head of Environmental Sustainability for British Land. British Land is a UK-focused REIT, so we own central London office campuses and retail parks and shopping centres up and down the country.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Lewis and I work for a company called EET Fuels. Now, unless you've walked or biked here today, you've probably interacted with our products. We produce about 15% of the UK's road fuels. So that means if you've driven in a non-electric car, taken a bus or a diesel train, or even flown here, you've probably used our products. And we're based in Ellesmere Port, just on the south bank of the River Mersey.
I'm Georgia Gould. I'm the leader of Camden Council and chair of London Councils, which is a cross-party collaborative of London boroughs.
Thank you. So TBNA, we are a high-performing building services consultancy, been around for about 60 years and have about 300 people across the UK. However, I'm going to start with a story today. This last year has been very difficult, but today's a special day for me. On the 17th of March last year, a building contractor team entered my house and started a renovation. Within 4 days, there was no roof, there was no windows, and a friendly neighbourhood fox had moved in to keep us company. But if I'm honest, the real trouble had started 2 years before that, when I had a dream of buying a house. As a professional in the built environment industry, I wanted to renovate a house to be on net zero carbon. My bank didn't offer green mortgages. I couldn't get any advice on green loans, retrofit loans, risks around EPCs, etc. That information was just not available to the domestic market. But I persevered, and I brought what a realtor would term a fixer-upper, or a lovely project, and what I would term is a proper shithole. The only issue my new home didn't have was it had no asbestos, but I couldn't understand that when I bought the house because there's no reasonable way to assess for that. So then I had to find a design for planning firm that knew about low energy, low carbon. I couldn't find one that knew what a U-value was, let alone understanding the nuances of how to renovate a home to prevent issues such as life-threatening mould. But I got there in the end. Then I had to find a contractor. That took over a year to find someone who was willing to work on my project. The only way I could do it was to entice them in by a loft conversion and then up-procure them to do the rest of the works in the house. But finally they started work, and they've worked consistently good. Everything that was abnormal, green or sustainable, was a raised eyebrow and an extra cost. Had to say, yes, I really do want to put insulation in the walls. Yes, I really do want to make the building airtight. But we got there in the end. But money started to rack up throughout the project. For every builder's van that was parked outside my house every day, Haringey Council charged me £22. That was on top of skip licences and all the VAT I had to pay on materials and labour. Sometimes I thought, wow, it would have been better if I was doing a new build. As the money built up, I had to get extra loans and things at 7.9%. So it was a challenging year. But the reason why today is special, and this is no joke, the building team are actually leaving the house today. They're installing the last 2 radiators, and they'll hand the keys back and be gone. So just with that little anecdote, it's easy to see why naysayers might latch onto green initiatives, shout them down, and lash out through controlled and traditional media and organised social media campaigns. However, I kind of see it as another way. I see the construction industry as huge for opportunity. If every one of these barriers that I faced could be addressed, then the impact and the acceleration towards targets would be huge. At Troop by Waters and Anders, we've taken a leadership position on this, and it's around apprentices. So at TB&A, we are a socially responsible and ethical partnership that is the best at everything we do. And we achieve this by having the best people and delivering the best work. So the best people, what do we mean by that and how do we achieve that? And really critical to this is leading the way with apprenticeships and professional development. And our ethos is to promote from within, start with people who are at the start of their careers, 16 or 18, and nurture them and grow them. And the proof really is in the pudding. 75% of our partners started as apprentices or as young recruits. But one particular person who's done a lot of work on this is a former managing partner, Neil Weller. And he joined a group of other employees and took the initiatives to lead the building services work streams as part of the Technical Apprenticeship Consortium group. Now he's a chair for several trailblazer groups and continues to reshape and reaccredit apprenticeships for the building services industry. And this has really changed how education is delivered to apprentices, and it really is game-changing work. So as part of this as well, as part of the leadership position on this, we have to work with professional institutions, training providers and other employees from all parts of the building services sector to write standards and specify the courses to match job requirements we need for the future. The green skills gap is huge. We need to do everything we can to bring talented people into industry and keep them in industry in order to address this. And in doing so with apprentices, we believe that the benefits are for the whole industry and providing opportunities to a lot wider range of people from all backgrounds. And building on this further, we are now working with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education on all apprenticeships nationwide to maximise sustainability opportunities in a greening UK programme. So we believe that this really is the future. And very excitingly this year is TB&A will be bringing the first environmental practitioner apprentice into the partnership. And the reason why I say this is really exciting is when I was interviewing the young apprentices for the role, the passion and the motivation and the education around sustainability issues was huge. And I was like, wow, if we have this energy from people who are 18 approaching their A-levels, as leaders, we've got to harness this energy. We've got to bring them into industry. We've got to train people. And this will help us on our fight against climate change. Okay, so that's enough about me and enough about TB&A. I'm going to open it up to the panel with a question first. And this is to everybody. So when considering leadership, what have you and your respective organisations addressed making NetZero more tactile and understandable whilst accelerating the meeting of targets?
Should I start?
Please, yep.
Right. Very interesting introduction, Mark. Thank you for that. I think the fundamental point that you were making across all the sort of obstacles you stated was something we call carbon literacy. Carbon is a science-based target, so actually in itself, it's very measurable and quantifiable. There's no sort of myth about carbon. But the problems that we face are the literacy, about the awareness, about how you actually go about quantifying and simplifying, demystifying the quantification and the delivery of net zero, so low carbon. And I think as a leader, going back to your question, as a leader, the biggest responsibility I have as a responsible investor and a leader is to make sure that carbon literacy exists throughout not just our own organization, but all the stakeholders that we deal with, everybody who works on any of our projects or is involved. And at the start, it often involves planners and people involved in communities to make the whole sort of sustainability goal actually tactile, achievable, and something that they can own proudly as an end result. And once you have that kind of, you've overcome that initial obstacle, the second one is going into the granularity of quantifying carbon at every stage of the process and making it something that is actually viable as part of your accounting system, as part of your budgeting system, sitting alongside everything else, and really embedding it into the cost of delivery at the end of the day to get your returns. We're private investors and obviously we want to do well and make a profit on everything we do. But it is about that. And I think, I'll talk more about our approach, but I think, the big one is the mindset change, I think, around carbon.
So from my perspective at Nottingham City Council, I'm a custodian and I'm the chief exec, but I've been there for 4 years. But in Nottingham, this goes back a long way. A green partnership was established in 1993, over 30 years ago, in terms of working on carbon reduction. And some of you may recall something called the Nottingham Declaration, which was an agreement between 200 local authorities and central government, which was signed in Nottingham in 2000. And again, that was targeted at reducing carbon emissions. So there's something for me about our role as a significant organisation, but also our role as conveners and collaborators. So in terms of ourselves as an organisation, we're quite big. We employ 7,000 people and we provide a range of services. But more importantly, the partnership that we've formed has over 40 organisations in it, including many anchor institutions, universities, the fourth largest hospital trust, as well as those that are looking to influence the behaviour of smaller businesses and individuals as well. And the benefit of that, in terms of that political leadership, in terms of being stewards and conveners for the city, but also the managerial leadership in terms of how to and supporting programmes working with government, is that between 2000 and 2015, carbon emissions across the whole city, not our organisation, but across the whole city, fell by 45%, which is a very significant reduction indeed. And that's all part of our commitment to trying to achieve carbon neutrality by 2028, which is a hugely ambitious target. I might get the question later in terms of how confident am I that we're going to hit that. But I suppose the point I'd make is it's been about that scale of ambition in terms of trying to work towards that carbon reduction goal.
Okay. Thank you, Mel.
Yeah, just to echo some of the points we've heard, I think. Carbon literacy and ensuring that your senior leadership team understands how carbon's calculated and what it means for your business. For our business, we've got two things to really worry about: embodied carbon of our developments and the operational carbon associated with our standing assets. And it's understanding what good looks like for both of those. So we've set really progressive targets for the embodied side of things and really progressive targets on the operating side of things. To link those two together, we've found it really useful for us to have what we've called a transition vehicle. So we actually tax the carbon in our developments and actually physically pay that money into this transition vehicle. And then we have a committee set up that can apply to that vehicle for funding to undertake some of the retrofitting projects that we need to do for our standing assets. But putting a financial indicator onto carbon has helped in a number of ways, because no one really understands what a tonne of carbon looks or feels like. But we really understand that at £90 a tonne of carbon, it's going to have a financial impact on the viability of some of our developments. It also then puts it into the cost plan of a development, and that then really helps convalesce the design team and the leadership team around that cost plan. You can see it there as a black and white line, and so it's evident, and it comes forward then in the decision making. And I think the last point is around the governance. So in that decision making process, having the financial indicator on carbon really helps us to understand it, but then understanding what good looks like and how far away a particular development is from it. We're now having instances at our IC meetings where developments are being turned down from our own internal IC because the carbon numbers are not yet strong enough. So those designs have to then go away and be reworked and see what other opportunities there are and how much they might cost the business to remove carbon from that design.
So I guess I just picking up on what some others have said and then talking about our experience. Absolutely understanding carbon and the impact is key. It's the vital starting point. You have a tremendous convening power to kind of engage people, and then that cost of carbon is a key, is a really, really important component in terms of decision making. So I told you that we produce like 15% of the UK's road fuels. So that's 30 million litres a day, about 10 billion a year. So they're really big numbers, aren't they? So alongside that, we also create an awful lot of carbon dioxide emissions. And by an awful lot, I mean about 12.5% of the whole of the North West's industrial carbon emissions. So about 2 million tonnes per annum. So for us, the leadership challenge with regard to climate change was very straightforward. Why don't we stop emitting? And that is our leadership position. We want to all but eliminate our carbon dioxide emissions before 2030. So when we're successful, I nearly said when we're successful in that, we think we will have set a new global benchmark for how you actually do refining, because no one else has plans as ambitious as ours. So we'll achieve the kind of global benchmark. We also will have helped with local climate change goals. We're in Little Cheshire, Western Chester Council. I think if we manage to eliminate our carbon emissions, we might have solved their climate crisis, because we're a pretty big emitter. And en route, we'll have solved an awful lot of local problems. And we do this with a workforce that is predominantly local. 20% of our workforce comes from Ellesmere Port, the town that we're connected to, and about 60 or 70% come from Cheshire and from the Wirral, which is just connected to us, our apprenticeship programme, our graduates. So we're really, really clear that there was really, when you're an oil refinery, there's really only one question to answer. First question to answer, how do you sort out those emissions? And we're on track to actually eliminate them by 2030.
Brilliant. So I think for me, there's a huge amount of consensus actually about the desire to take action on the climate crisis. We did some polling as London councils of Londoners, and I think 90% of Londoners said they were motivated to take action on the climate crisis. But how far that is their number one priority, people facing housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, day-to-day issues, it's not always the first thing that they want to see tackled. And when it comes down to policies on their doorstep, like a new cycle lane, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to support that policy or that change. So I think building coalitions is really critical, and starting where people are. And in Camden, we've run the UK's first Citizens' Assembly. There's now been hundreds, I think, around the country. And I think that space of having people there who thought that Camden Council should ban all cars, and then people there who thought we persecuted car users, and everyone in between, and having that kind of real debate about what they wanted the transition to look like, what they wanted citizens to do, the council to do, businesses to do, was really critical, because it gave legitimacy to the plans that we came up with for our 2030 ambitions. And it started to mobilise a huge amount of action. So by starting with citizens, we've seen a huge amount more investment, energy, and motivation across our borough to take forward our climate action plan. But I think the second is starting where people are in their lives. And so, if people's biggest concern is around food poverty, how do you take action around food waste and set up food cooperatives? If it's, we know fuel poverty is a massive issue, then you can start to have a conversation about retrofit and the housing changes that's needed, so people can live in damp-free and affordable homes. If it's about employment and fears about employment, what are the new jobs that you talked about that could be created? And I think when you start with people's lived experience and frame it not about always taking something away, but what you can gain. In our borough, there's a road that we've turned into a park, and it's been amazing to see kind of children and their excitement about that. So this transition doesn't need to be something to fear, but actually we can start to solve these more fundamental issues we face as a society, and also make it easy for people. So your story, and you're an amazing pioneer in your housing journey, but actually how do we make that so much easier for people? And some work that Nottingham and London councils and the other core cities outside of London have been doing together, called Free CI, and they've got various events today and tomorrow if people are interested, is around how do we, as scale, as local authorities, bring some of the big kind of investment numbers we hear about at COP into real projects in our communities. And we've got a proposition called NetZero neighbourhoods, which would mean that we could retrofit a whole neighbourhood without people having to pay up front. And we as councils would manage a lot of the problems that you face, that we think that we're starting to pilot them, and we think could take us so much faster towards the journey. So I think there's a lot we can do using our scale, but unless we start with communities and their lived experience, we won't keep that coalition together.
Thank you, everyone. I think one thing I noticed across everybody's response, and one thing I'm really passionate about myself, is coalitions or collaborations. I was speaking with you before the session, Michelle, and you were talking about a blue hydrogen project, which is a great example of public-private collaboration, which has led to an investable project with highly positive, sustainable outcomes. Please, can you talk us through some of the success factors of bringing that about?
Yeah. So I'll just talk about 3 or 4 different success factors of that. The first one is policy, a really, really strong government policy. So it started with Boris Johnson and the Green Industrial Revolution, the 10-point plan, where really firm targets were set out for hydrogen production and carbon capture. Those targets were strengthened in the British Energy Security Policy, which was a result of the Ukraine war, which then said, actually, from a policy position, government were willing to support the production of 10 gigawatts of hydrogen, and they wanted to use carbon capture to capture about 20 to 30 million tonnes of carbon per year. So a really, really strong and robust policy environment, then followed up with the implementation tools to do that. I think the second big component for us is the place and the kind of geographic and built environment benefits of the place where we're situated. And what I mean by that is right next to Stanlow, which is where I work on the River Mersey, there are depleted gas fields run by the Italian giant Eni. Those depleted gas fields are end of life, so they exist, there are pipeline connections to it, and they can be repurposed for carbon capture. There's also caverns, which mean that you can actually do hydrogen production. So we've got the River Mersey, which is, this incredible deep water port, which means you can do import and export. So huge geographic benefits of place. And then we've got built environment benefits. We've got infrastructure, we've got industry, we've got the network to import and export, we've got the built environment to move fuels around. So that's a kind of built environment. Third component is people. Of course, you need highly skilled people. And because you have the infrastructure and the industry in our area, you have the highly skilled people who are absolutely able to deliver this type of project at scale. The engineers, the people who are used to dealing with what are very, very complex components and dangerous components, they're used to doing it and they have those skills. And the fourth thing was just really clever people who put it all together. So we're part of a collection of companies called HyNet, and very, very clever engineers plus representatives from a range of companies said, there's this opportunity, we've got the natural competitive benefits, the natural benefits of the geography and the built environment, and we've got the skills. So that's HyNet is an alliance of companies like mine, traditional fossil fuel companies, also of Eni, transport and storage companies, Cadent, who will be able to build, who will be able to transport the hydrogen, and then off-takers. Just, literally, well, you can see it out the window, but it's about half a mile away from us is a company called NSERC. NSERC bottle wine for Diageo, and they're under consumer pressure to actually have low-carbon processes in that glass production. So immediately you've got a customer for the hydrogen that we'll produce. So this kind of these different components of a really strong and robust policy environment, the geographic and built environment advantages, and massively skilled workforce, then off-takers who actually want to take the product, and really, really clever people who brought all this together, and it's called HyNet, are the things that have kind of enabled this project to progress. So now we're in a position that hopefully in August, September, we'll be able to take a final investment decision for our first, the leading, we think, large-scale low-carbon hydrogen production plant at Stanlow. And that will enable us not only to decarbon our processes as EET fuels, that will enable us to fuel switch to hydrogen, but it will also enable NSERC, to fuel switch their furnaces so that they are now producing low-carbon glass. We'd really, really like a bit more investment. We'd like a little bit more policy certainty. And then we'll be able to fully decarbonise, but also our ambition. I said our ambition is to eliminate all of our carbon emissions, is to use that carbon capture network to capture those emissions that we can't fuel switch to hydrogen, the hard to abate ones, so that will help us produce it. But they're kind of 4 or 5 of the really big components that enable you to kind of make investment at scale of this type.
Okay, so that was quite an interesting answer around a policy that kind of mitigates risk in the long term. Georgia, if you could perhaps say one ask from private industry to government about what could private industry bring to collaborations?
From private industry to government? Or?
Yes, yeah. So if you had one ask from the private businesses on the panel here.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think it's to work with us and collaborate. So as FreeCI, we as local government have come together at scale to look at what we can do to decarbonise our cities, and the numbers are kind of eye-watering. It's 98 billion for London and 206 billion for core cities, and we can't do that on our own. So we need to have the partnership as you've set out. And I think that we have a lot of assets, relationships with our tenants and communities, and there's the kind of expertise you've talked about, and it will be different for different places. For a kind of urban area like mine, kind of decarbonising our buildings is the big challenge. So we're looking for partners who are willing to share some of the risks, to take on innovation, who are willing to look at new models, and I think, like you, our ask for government would be regulatory certainty to enable that to happen, and investment to kickstart some of these projects.
I'm going to segue a little bit to you, Matt. How do British Land approach a business case for sustainability? And do you see any particular barriers around delivering sustainability on your projects?
Business case for sustainability. I think, like in a one-line summary, it is our license to operate. We are a developer, and we know we are responsible for carbon emissions, and the buildings we operate are responsible for carbon emissions. We've been through a process of a double materiality check. So what is our impact on the environment, and what is the impact environment on us? And then you do that through your key stakeholders. So local authorities, we need to be able to demonstrate that we can develop in a responsible manner, in a low carbon way, bring some of that investment and innovation forward on different projects. Our customers, so in the products that we deliver, in the buildings that we deliver, our customers are demanding low carbon workplaces for their own staff. And so a big driver there is being able to offer the workplaces that people are after. Our investment community, they expect us to be able to articulate our decarbonisation pathways at the senior levels of our business. So again, back to the education piece with the senior leadership team, understanding the targets we've set and the progress we're making against those targets. And then I think the local community, so as a operator and a custodian of space, being able to use our influence and custodianship to deliver wider social benefit into a place where we are developing is a fundamental part of our ability to operate as a developer and a landlord. Barriers, I guess, is at the moment net zero is somewhat of a moving target. We've got the SBTI building guidance helping us with the performance benchmarks that are required to be considered net zero. We are scrutinising that draft form at the moment, but obviously SBTI have got their own governance issues ongoing. We're part of the industry approach in the UK for the net zero building standard. I think there is a couple of forums on that at the moment, but that will seek to define both embodied carbon and operational performance criteria for the built environment. And so that would be really helpful to help the industry as a whole define what we consider net zero to be. But I think probably the biggest barrier is supply chain engagement and bringing forward lower carbon materials. So fantastic to hear about the switch to hydrogen. We need that to happen across the heavy materials that we need to develop with. So steel manufacturing, taking cement out of concrete, and lovely, we're doing lots of experiments with recycling glass at the moment. If that can be manufactured in a low carbon way, that would be really helpful as well.
Okay, thank you. A few people have talked about a kind of legislative environment or policy environment. Ami, I was going to pick your brains a little bit on would a UK green taxonomy help accelerate green growth?
I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. If you look at what's happening in the EU right now as a comparison, because they've had a green taxonomy for longer than any other part of the world, you see capital that is, they're attracting capital into the European economies that is really focused on sustainability objectives. And that is where the UK is missing out. So the UK Sustainability Investment Association, UKREiiF they call themselves, did a survey recently where they polled about 100 business decision makers within the housing sector. And they came out with these results which are quite fascinating. The UK will lose about £30 billion of inward investment into this is just the housing sector over the next few years because of the lack of consistent policy landscapes for sustainability. That capital will go somewhere else where they're sure that their sustainable development goals, their ESG compliant objectives will be better met. So that's an opportunity that we don't want to lose. I think having a consistent sustainability policy landscape, sort of bottom up, top down, is really important. We have the big legislation in place, but then nothing has really worked consistently within it. For example, I mean, we don't have decent signposting for green mortgages. I mean, you talked about it earlier in your example, but that's a very important one to get right. EPCs, again, we don't have clear signposting on what's going to happen now for private rented as well as for new builds. There's a lot of opportunity to simplify and create kind of a taxonomy that stands in itself, on its own sort of shoulders, where we can say that we are all about, we've got a whole economy that's actually developing in a sustainable way, and we should be able to attract that funding to the UK. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to focus on one word in the session title at the moment, is the beyond word. I'm going to ask yourself, Mel, how does the City of Nottingham impact sustainability in the round?
Well, it's at so many different layers, isn't it? One, it's kind of sending a signal to the city that this is something that people care deeply about, and that their elected leaders are ambitious about, and sending signals that this is something we want to work on together. And as I say, that deep history, Green Partnership 1993, Nottingham Declaration 2000, carbon neutral by 2028. And I think there's something about, there's opportunity and excitement about this. And it happens both in terms of what's the art of the possible at the policy level, in terms of the differences it can make in terms of funding streams, employment opportunities, supply chains, and all of that. At the programme level, what could we be doing if we join together and kind of scale up in terms of the opportunities, the way that George has described in terms of what it can mean in terms of investors coming in and taking advantage of those opportunities. And then at the project level, I was having a chat with Matt as we were waiting to sort of come inside here today. We've got a big shopping centre that was from the 1970s. Before COVID, we were going to redevelop it into a new shopping centre. Probably the best thing that we ever did was that there was a crash and it didn't get redeveloped, because if it had been developed as new retail, it'd probably be empty right now in terms of some of our city centres being overshot. But what we've got is we've done some demolition work, and there's a structural concrete frame, and there's been a bit of a debate locally where we've sort of engaged with local residents, and we've had over 3,000 separate responses as to what we should do. And people want us to inject a green heart into the city centre, which has some viability challenges in terms of built development. But I was having a chat with Matt. That thing about a concrete frame dating from the 70s, to what extent is it an investable proposition to create a new facility that investors will come in and back on the back of the knowledge of it, the warranties around it, and all the rest of it. So there is so much going on here at every level that I think in terms of the role of cities and the role of city leadership is to encourage what's happening, I think, to speak to government, and in terms of the work that needs to be done at the super government level as well, as in terms of showing the way in terms of what it's prepared to do, and the way that Matt was talking about that pricing of carbon, I just thought was so exciting as well. So I think there is just so much to learn from each other in terms of a cross-sectoral approach, and the sense in which the challenge is one that will drive innovation. But I suppose my reflection, Mark, would be is that it's trying to create that stable policy environment, isn't it? We're trying to do what we can locally, but we also need that stable policy environment as much as we can nationally as well.
Okay, okay, thank you. George, do you see similar initiatives around impact and sustainability in London?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's exactly as you've set out. As local authorities, we have a number of big levers. So we have procurement, we have planning, which is huge in terms of driving new sustainable development and also encouraging retrofit. We have our kind of convening role, and we have a climate alliance of hundreds of different businesses working together to kind of share expertise about decarbonisation. We have our community leadership role. So much of emissions is about how we live our lives and supporting people to make those shifts where they can, you know, whether it's to walking or cycling more, or whether it's to kind of the kind of small scale retrofit that reduce carbon emissions in homes. And I think that it's making it easier for people, giving them the information that they need to be able to make those choices, because most people do, and often they kind of align for people, but also making it, as I was saying earlier, something that includes everyone, and where people are facing really, really tough challenges in their lives, that it is, you know, this journey is accessible to them, because ultimately it is some of our poorest residents who I think kind of see the worst impact of a climate crisis, not just internationally, but in our communities. You know, on the extreme heat, they're the ones who can't afford the kind of air conditioning that more affluent residents can. They're the ones who are struggling with the instability in energy markets. They're the ones who, you know, often are young people in the most disadvantaged areas are where the emissions are highest and the worst air quality. So I think kind of for us, it's also making sure that we've got that alignment between our other goals as a local authority. But I think we have to operate at every level, and we have to create a kind of work in a completely different way in terms of mobilisation and coalition building, because 2030, and we have a 2030 ambition. You know, at the moment we've just done a carbon budget, and we are still so far away from meeting 2030 as a local authority, and we won't do it without national change, without the businesses and the financial sectors working alongside us. You know, we on our own estates we're meeting our targets, but the coalition bit needs everyone to work together, which is why conversations like this, I think, are so exciting.
I think systems change starts with a conversation, doesn't it? On that, Ami, I'm going to ask you, in terms of responsible leadership, creating social value is critical, as several people have outlined. Do private sector developers need to do more to create and, more importantly, showcase community development and regenerative design?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we can do much more, and we should be doing more. And I think it comes back to the point that Georgia and everybody else has been making about collaboration. You've been making. I think at the end of the day, carbon is a great objective to have, but it is a tussle. It doesn't, like you said, Georgia, very well. It doesn't necessarily hit the immediate touch points that people are worried about. It did in a big way when we had the Ukraine war start, and when energy prices did what they did, and suddenly energy security became central to everybody's thinking, and energy bills became central, and people started to think about what else they could do in terms of energy security and sufficiency. But aside from that, it is a tussle, and I think what is really interesting is when you start looking at the circular economy kind of approach, which is regenerative design led approach. You don't think of carbon as being the end result. You think about sort of good quality living, and you think about life chances for people in that particular place as being a fantastic end result, because actually carbon has to just be part of the problem that you're solving for. You're solving for social value, and you're solving for creating places that generate more. And interesting, we do a lot of data crunching. We're pretty data focused as an organization. And I saw in this UK Cities Investor Guide that was out here today, and it said that Tower Hamlets is the highest performing, well, London is the highest performing in terms of productive places, but Tower Hamlets is the top performing with 72 pounds GVA per hour. I wonder if that would be the case if you look at sustainability principles and air quality, for example. It'd probably fall further down, and that's exactly what we're talking about here, that financial performance on its own or decarbonization on its own is not sufficient in terms of long-term principles, and you've got to look at much more about what you're bringing to the place. So in terms of social value, for example, our scheme in Croydon, which we got planning consent for recently, it's a 36-story tower. It's probably going to sort of add to the sort of the tall landscape in the centre of Croydon. But what we've done there, and we did this through kind of an initial stakeholder engagement, was we realized a complete lack of community centres and community hubs in Croydon. There was much more that needed to be done. We talked to lots of charities and a variety of stakeholders, and we've built a community hub which will be sort of the ground floor of our building almost, except for the reception area and the lifts and the private lobby for the residents. And that'll have a capacity of circa 200 sort of seated capacity, and that'll be available to the community to use for various activities through the year. It's obviously it's accessible, and it's available for holiday programs, etc. And it's the way of we're giving back through BTR to the community in that way. I'm not sure we've advertised it or talked about it like you suggested as much, but we can see that sort of thing can really impact social value in the environment that private investors operate in. So it's a good example, I guess.
Yeah, I really believe that if you want to have a resilient development of any kind, putting community first will give inherent resilience. On my more extreme days, I think we shouldn't focus on carbon at all. Focus on social inequality, fix that, and carbon will solve itself. That's maybe quite radical. Yeah. In terms of British Land, Matt, do you see similar upside around community building and social value on your projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So our strategy is kind of three main pillars: greener spaces, which is the work I do on decarbonisation, biodiversity, material circularity, and climate resilience. But I have a colleague in a very similar role heading up our Thriving Places strategy, which is all about social impact and social value. How do we create a positive long-term social impact for the communities that we're involved with? Again, coming back to where we have the biggest levers to pull, that's either through education programs that we can run through our supply chains, it's through upskilling local workforces so that they can gain meaningful employment in the future, or through those educational work programs. And then obviously we're an operator of space, so how can we use that space to lend and facilitate local community groups and local community action? All of our London campuses run a community fund where we're pooling resource from our customers, and it really creates a sense of place for Regent's Place or Broadgate Estate. So the customers, the big occupiers, that's Meta, Santander, the big legal firms, etc., all pooling together to input into a community fund and then deciding how that should be distributed to that local community. It creates this sense of place around the campus and a sense of ownership, and that this campus is not just for the people that work there, it is also helping to stimulate the local community and provide there.
And it does. Regent's Place is in Camden, and that is really true. I think that the level of investment we've seen, and it's next to some of the poorest estates in the UK, and I think that it has made a tangible difference, and there is a lot of investment going into community leadership and joint action on the climate crisis. So when people say on panels, it's not always happening, but I think it is really happening, and that relationship is there, yeah.
You'd like you about to add something, Amy?
Oh, no, I was going to also say that co-living is an interesting housing format that really lends itself to creating value, because you're talking about young people who have who are looking for a community where they can actually socialize and meet up with others. Mental health is a massive problem that we don't often talk about, but we must address it through living formats that that we're building, so that we build in a future-proof way. And it doesn't just, I mean, private-public realm involvement is really critical. And I think if we think about housing formats as being central in the way we live, as being central to how we deal with some of these social problems, then we can actually come up with much more innovation around the type of product that we provide.
But it's also, I mean, there are trade-offs, because you're talking, when we're building new council housing, we built one of the largest passive house schemes in the country, but it is much more expensive to build in that way, and it's the right thing to do, and it's amazing in terms of outcomes for residents, but we can build fewer social homes as a result. So that there are, it's not always, we try to look for win-win policies, but sometimes you do have to make those trade-offs between inequality and the climate crisis.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to build on that, we'd love to see more collaboration around local offsetting. So offsetting, potentially a dirty word, but it's only as an action of last resort once you've got a comprehensive emissions reduction plan. But it will be needed for some unmitigated Scope 3 emissions around embodied carbon. And at the moment, we're offsetting that using kind of global projects in nature resources, rainforests and habitat creation things. But there is an opportunity to work with local authorities to identify additional decarbonisation programmes locally and help fund those as well to make them happen.
We do have a retrofit local offset in Camden, so
There
we
we
can
go.
talk at the end about that, so you can fund retrofit on your doorstep.
I think just that back to very local though. Our refinery's been there for 100 years, so we've had the permission of our community to operate for a very long time. And it doesn't mean for a second that we take it for granted, but if you meet anybody in Ellesmere Port or in the neighbourhood and you say, oh, do you know Stanley? They say, yeah, my brother worked there, my mum worked there. It's that kind of place. But we don't take that for granted. And just a little story about the social value and ensuring and remembering to engage with that community. A local primary school approached us and said, will you sponsor the STEAM Festival, which is STEM but with an A, with a little bit of arts in it. So it's a really, really nice festival. And they said it was a community very close to where we work. So again, one of these odd things where an awful lot of wealth is created in one space, and then right next door to it is some social housing where some of a very, very deprived community. And the primary school teacher was saying, we really, really want to inspire the children to get up and leave. And I said, no, we don't. We want to inspire them to come and work for us and get their apprenticeship and be part, because, you can have a really great career as a process engineer, a chemical engineer, an electrical engineer, and you're building the future, you're building the energy transition. And the headmaster said, no, you misunderstand. I want them to leave the estate. And just these kind of reminders that actually remembering to have big ambitions and wide ambitions, but also just to connect with the kids who live next door and help them to raise their ambitions and to see the possibility and what's right in front of them is a really, really part of what we can bring and what we can contribute.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important to engage with the very young in our communities, because they have some fantastic ideas. I know we do lots of outreach in Camden with schools, and it's very, very rewarding, but also you see the passion, the energy that the future of the world is coming up with. It's fantastic. I'm going to open the question to the audience now. We are using Slido today, but we do have a roaming mic as well. I can't see very well, so perhaps the person with the roaming mic can do the choosing.
Yeah, it works. Sorry, I was closer to the mic. Although I wasn't the first one. Thank you. Yeah, that was really fascinating. My quick question, I don't know who wants to answer this, but as we all know, mostly that the transition and this journey towards net zero involves the entire value chain, right? And most of you, I think, touched upon a little bit about the collaboration between finance and developers and etc. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts in terms of what practical steps you are taking currently to unite, as much of the entire value chain as possible. I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, I was going to just chip in very quickly and give a plug for the UK Green Building Council. So we've just been working together on a systems change initiative, which is, as you say, is connecting the value chain up and understanding that system. So there is that holistic thinking going on, and the UK GBC is driving that. Ami?
We're using there's two ways I can answer that question. The first is that, practically speaking, you're creating a lot of data and transparency around the process is really critical, because otherwise you are not going to be able to. It's comparing apples with apples at every stage in the value chain. That's really critical as far as the carbon journey is concerned, and quantifying that and costing that. So that's really important. We've developed an in-house tool. We call it AMCAS, which is AMRO's Carbon Assessment Standardization Tool. It's a bit of software that we've actually led and developed ourselves, because we think it's so critical to be able, right from pre-design stage to afterwards into the sort of end-of-life stage, the whole life carbon journey essentially, to be able to really monitor, measure, and support the reporting and transparency around that. Without that, I don't think investors are very, very savvy these days. Not going to come on board. KPIs are very clear as far as investment in green assets is concerned. It's getting stronger and more it's now sort of version 3.0, I would say, in terms of the diligence that's required around it, and you just got to keep up with that. And in terms of, once you have that sort of accountability, if you like, that comes with the data transparency, it's much easier to have a joined-up conversation with a developer, construction companies, and eventually whoever manages or operates the assets. The other one is, of course, the sort of change in mindset that I talked about earlier. It's bringing that whole lexicon of talking about climate change and carbon intensity, so energy and use intensity essentially, and all the kind of metrics that go and the KPIs that go with carbon. We actually do a per capita count, because we believe that actually density in itself is a measure of carbon intensity. So our entire kind of optimization plan, or the metrics we use, actually land on an individual's carbon footprint in any of our buildings. And we think that's a really easy way eventually to translate into an operational building where you actually have residents who then own their carbon footprint, really, essentially, is how we think about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add? Okay. There's a gentleman at the front.
Thank you for an interesting panel. Georgia, my question's for you. So we all sit here in a relative echo chamber and share ideas and innovation. My worry is that the person on the street doesn't really understand what net zero means and what is carbon. So I'd be interested to know from your London boroughs what people are understanding around this area, and should we be focusing on comfort rather than carbon when it comes to our homes?
I think people know about the climate crisis. They understand about, summers being extremely hot, weather changes, people gone on a summer holiday and there's forest fires. People know that the climate crisis is happening and that it's important. And for some voters, it's become the number one issue. Some people are incredibly motivated by it. I think most people care about it, but it's what I said about, whether it's number one on their agenda. If you're, for a lot of our residents, we did a survey recently and 20% are skipping meals because of a cost of living crisis. They're unable to feed their children or put a winter coat. It's very hard to care about something that feels long term when you're faced with a day-to-day crisis. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to kind of connect it to people's lives. And I think it's about, we've got a project in Somerstown which is close to Regent's Park, also one of the poorest communities, not just in London but in the UK, which is about, it's called A Future Neighbourhoods, and we've been working really closely with residents. Most of them are facing real deprivation on what action they want to take on the climate crisis. And it's, there's so many different routes in for them, so that some might feel unlikely. So food is one massive one, like lots of people don't have any green space. Actually, having food growing on their estates is really motivating. Setting up a food co-op to save money is really motivating. Being able to do a clothes swap for children, again, is something that people can get behind. Planting trees. You know, there's lots of ways that, you can kind of interact in a way that benefits people's daily lives. So I think you have to start where people are, which is, you know, housing, damp and mould, energy costs, food poverty, low employment, all these different issues. But you can also look at solutions that take action on a climate crisis, and people want that. They're looking for those kind of double wins, because they do care about it, and actually there is that sense of purpose that anyone feels. And I think the kind of panel originally was framed around those who are trying to take this as an issue and create a culture war out of it. And you do get some of that. There is a lot of anger around especially some of the car policies that have happened. But actually the people who are doing that are not winning. And the mayoral elections were really, in London, were a really good test of that. That, you know, there was a massive attempt by the Conservative candidate to make that the story of the campaign. And Sadiq Khan won, you know, making a very bold argument on ULEZ, which is, you know, a controversial policy. And I think it does show that you can do big things and hard things if you make the argument and lean into it. So I don't think we should abandon talking about the climate crisis, but we need to talk about it in a way that connects into those other issues that people face. And if we don't do that, then I think we'll never get anywhere.
Thank you.
Shall I just build on that? We use a shorthand, don't we? In a room like this, we use a shorthand when we sort of talk about some of this stuff. But if I think about it in terms of protecting children and young people in the context of air quality, for example, people are interested in that. If we think about our strategies for, we might call something walk and wheel, but actually it means that there's a place you can cycle safely without fear of coming across cars unexpectedly. Builds on things that George is saying, that if you adopt that mindset, therefore, in terms of things like local food production, in terms of those that may not have access to fresh food and so on. So I think it is about a holistic approach of which carbon reduction is a part. And therefore, I think it's something that, in terms of policymakers and looking to kind of make progress against things, that there is something about recognising that we do use shorthand, but it does connect with people in a very real sense. And some of the stuff that we've done, it's not always been popular in terms of taking people's rights away to build a tram system that's taken away people's rights in terms of compulsory purchase, but it's powered by electricity. It's a kind of low-carbon public transit route. Electric buses, we own our own bus company. We're quite rare as a local authority in terms of doing that. And all of those things together with all the cycling and the walking and all the rest of it has meant that we haven't needed a low emission zone, which is quite a rare thing in terms of a major city, which is something that is appreciated by local people. And that point again about fuel poverty, damper mould, yes, but also the efforts that people have tried to make in order to reduce the cost of energy for people that are on some of our lowest incomes. So I think there is something that we do use a shorthand. But never forget, it is real, and it does get traction in terms of our communities, I think, building on George's point.
If I can just add one more thing. When I talk to my young sons, not so young anymore, in their 20s, their habits of how they live and what they aspire to are so different from our generation. And I mean, the two things that really stand out to me whenever I'm speaking to them is social media, of course. That's number one. And number two is shared economy. They really have created habits around shared economy that are quite unusual, that would have been very unusual for our generation. We didn't have the digital infrastructure for it, granted. But I don't think it would have come naturally to us to go and, you know, in their generation, it's all about sort of second-hand stuff and buying recycled and vintage and whatever they call it, and you know, they're often branded very well for their own purposes, but there's a lot about shared economy in that generation. Not wanting to own, but wanting to rent, wanting to have an experience or share a part of. It's a big underlying theme, and I think that's super credible in terms of a net zero kind of thinking.
Okay, thank you. I think we have Time for just one last question quickly. I think there's a gentleman at the front. Did you?
You would effectively be giving the same answers to my question. So.
Okay.
I think there's a chap back there, Mark, if you want.
Yeah, we have a few seconds, but please ask.
Okay, well, I'm putting the pressure on now, aren't you? Right, so what I was going to say was that we talked a lot, I think, about buildings which are either in the city centres or a local authority owned, where perhaps the answer is more readily available. But is there a problem around lower quality assets that might be in the donut around cities, where there's perhaps the asset value is lower, there's less interest in redeveloping them? What do people see as the future for those kind of places?
I know you do quite a lot of work in brownfield sites, don't you, Amy? Through AMRO.
Some, yeah. The future regeneration potential. Well, I think you can't. I would say it has to be on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I'm willing to defer to Matt or anybody else on the panel, but I don't think we can actually talk about any place sort of with a blanket kind of approach. I think there is always some potential for regeneration. I mean, that's undoubtedly true. It's about finding out what's going to work in that place and really spending the time to understand what you're trying to replace. Are you trying to replace jobs? Are you trying to replace infrastructure? What's the best way to get that area to actually come alive and thrive again? Or is it something that you need to import out of another part? Or is it, is it like some kind of a connectivity issue that you need to resolve for? But I think there are lots of parameters at stake, I would say, that would need to be analysed before understanding what, how that could happen. But undoubtedly, it's it can be a challenge, but it can be done, I'm sure.
The flashing light's getting quite angry at the moment, so I think I'd better wrap up. I think it's been a really interesting discussion today. Thank you for everybody for participating. The answer's quite simple, really. We put people first, we listen to them, and we create communities, and we're done. we can go home. But thank you, everybody. Just give the panel a hand.
Thank you.